Hi there, this is Tracy Malone from NarcissistAbuseSupport.com. Survivors of narcissistic abuse often feel shame for being in an abusive relationship, for staying, for not knowing, or they may even experience guilt. Do you know the difference between shame and guilt? Most of my clients struggle with it and are amazed at the explanations that they find out. And when they realize that they don't have to hold on to shame, they become more powerful. They become less victimized because they can let go of some things that have happened to them. My guest today is Sharon Martin. She's an expert in so many things, including shame and guilt. And she's going to talk to us about the difference between the two and how we go about healing shame, how we look at shame, how we expose shame, and how we do not let shame control us anymore. I'm going to share a little bit of story about myself and my biggest shame moment and share with you how I let go of that. And we're going to talk to Sharon. So let's welcome her and learn about shame and guilt today. Hey, welcome, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, so it was my pleasure. Thank you, Tracy.
Welcome. Would you start off by telling my audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I am a psychotherapist. I'm licensed in California. So I work in a private practice seeing clients. That's what I do for the most of my job. But I also do a lot of writing. So I tend to write a lot of articles, and I think we may talk about some of those today. And I've written one book. It's called the CBT Workbook for Perfectionism. Working on another one, which will be coming at some point. It's a process, but I really enjoy that as well. And just being able to provide, more information, just like, we're doing in this video, but in writing and in videos, and just being able to share that with more people. Obviously, I'm fairly limited in the number of people I can see for therapy individually. So it's a nice opportunity. And I really appreciate you having me on so that we can talk some more about shame and really dig into that, and hopefully give people some resources and some ideas of things that they can do. I work a lot with shame. It tends to go hand in hand with the codependency and the perfectionism, which is, probably the things. If you ask me, like, what kind of things do you work on with people? Those are the big ones, but you really can't deal with those issues without dealing with the shame that's underneath it. It's sort of an interesting thing. I'd say it's pretty rare that somebody shows up and says what they want to work on is shame, but it's often what's underneath, the things that are bothering them, right? The other feelings that they're having that are uncomfortable, or the behaviors that they're doing to try to deal with the shame that start making them, either causing some problems for them or just making them feel bad in their life. So
it all ties together, and it very much ties together with the victims of narcissistic abuse.
Mm-hmm.
To gravitate towards shame for, staying, shame for having children with this person, shame. It's just like, and we get very deeper into it. But before we talk about shame, I think there's a big misconception with people, the difference between shame and guilt. And then we hear the word toxic shame, we hear codependent shame. There's all kinds of things out there, and people are like, I don't know what I have, but I don't feel good, right? So can you help us to like break up the difference between shame and guilt? Guilt, I did something wrong, and shame, I'm bad, right? I did something bad, I'm bad. So how can you help us understand that a little bit deeper?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. That's the fundamental distinction that you want to make, is that guilt is the feeling or the belief that you've done something wrong. And what I would say about that is that guilt has the potential to actually be a helpful emotion. If you actually have done something wrong, then it's appropriate to feel bad about it, right? I mean, if I have, done something to hurt somebody, intentionally, unintentional, right? And I feel bad about that, right? There's some motivation there for me to correct that behavior. And there's, I think, some understanding and potentially, a place to have some empathy as well. But shame, on the other hand, we really tend to think about shame as like there's really nothing helpful about the feeling of shame, which is, instead of feeling like you've done something wrong, it's the fundamental really painful belief that there is something wrong with you as a person. So it's not just an action, right, that you've done, which is like sort of one kind of piece of who we are, or the things that we do, but we're talking about this really maybe sort of like a core belief about yourself that, there's something inadequate or unworthy or wrong about you as a person. And that just feels much more pervasive to me, And so certainly, somebody could have shame that centers around a particular event. But what I tend to see is that it sort of sends out those ripples, and it kind of overtakes everything. Because like I said, I think it becomes almost like a belief system, not just a feeling of, being an unworthy or unlovable person. Um,
And shame and guilt is about doing something wrong, saying the wrong thing to someone. You feel bad that you hurt their feelings. But shame, again, it's permeated in your body, and
mm.
like you just feel like I don't want anyone to know. It's a secret in many ways, right?
Yeah. And like I was saying, I mean, certainly guilt can be what I would say is sort of an inappropriate guilt too. Like we can think that we did something wrong when we really didn't. Um, but I would say shame is really, it's almost always wrong, because it's not just, what we think about ourselves, it's what we think other people think about us, right? There's this element of judgment of ourselves, but also, you know other people judging us, and it's a negative judgment, right? It's thinking that other people think that we have done something wrong. And here's, where we kind of get into that aspect of the secretive nature, is because right, we don't want people to know what we have done, or who we are, because we really believe that they are going to think so poorly of us, right? That it's going to reinforce. So then we just hold on to, these secrets, right? And we all know, like, the secrets just kind of fester in that dark, hidden place. Is that then our thoughts really just kind of, get out of control with it, right? We just, you know, to me it's like you have shame about something, but then you have shame about having shame, and so it just becomes this, spiral. And that's where I was saying, I think it just becomes this real pervasive, feeling, or belief that you have, that's no longer about a specific, thing that you did or that happened to you. And it's really, it's really a false belief system, because so often when we think about shame, we are blaming ourselves for things that really, weren't, and they weren't things that we did wrong, certainly. And they certainly don't actually mean that we are bad, unlovable, unworthy people. Like there's a whole, thinking process, right, that has gotten off track, that, creates this feeling of shame for us.
Absolutely. And I think with victims of abuse, I think that we hold on to things that aren't ours to carry.
Hmm.
Like things that were done to us, or are someone else's actions, and now you're in this horrific divorce, and like the neighbors are looking at you funny, and you feel like you've done something wrong when in fact you were a victim. And so we
Yes.
hold on to that shame, and it's like a stigma. It's a prejudice that we self-define. I'm bad because I'm getting a divorce, or I didn't know this was happening, and therefore I'm stupid. How could I have made it this far? And then there's also a piece which a lot of victims have, which is something that comes from their family. They came into a relationship with someone abusive because they lived with it their whole life and didn't recognize it. That was me. But that shame gets passed down generationally. Like it came in when you were 13 and you held on to it, and so it almost became a weapon to a narcissist, or someone that's going to abuse you. They know your shame, they know that vulnerability and that weakness. And then when they push on it, it activates everything that's been there all along. And we didn't even really know it. It's just coming all back up to
Yep.
the yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree completely. I mean, I think you hit so many important points in there. Um, that you're right. I mean, when we talk about being in an abusive marriage or an abusive relationship as an adult, I mean, it's almost always the case that you've already come to that relationship with carrying shame from your past. And then just like you said, I mean, you're just, you're so prone to it that it takes very little for that to get activated in a new relationship. And then, here you are, right? Taking the blame for things that you didn't do, that you didn't cause, that you didn't create, and feeling this tremendous shame as if you did something wrong here. And like we said, I mean, and that belief that, because you're in this situation, it's because there's something wrong with you, right? And the blame is completely displaced, right, from the perpetrator to the victim. um I mean, when we think about that with our logical minds, we're like, this just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, right? That the person that is being abused is the one who feels like there's something wrong with them and they shouldn't speak up and tell people because people are going to think something negative about them, when they are not the one who are doing the abuse, right? Right. And that's shame that allows us to, get into that twisted way of thinking about ourselves. And it's so painful, the notion of what are people going to think about me if they know, that we just don't say anything, right? And then that again, that allows the abuse to continue, right? So we're in this, perpetual cycle of the abuse and the shame. And and it's understandable why you don't know how to get out, right? Because it feels like the only way out, you have to go through the shame, right? You've got to tell somebody what's going on.
Absolutely. And when you brought that up, it just like it triggered me to the most shameful day of my life.
Mm.
That was when my narcissist had me arrested and put in jail. And I was so shamed. I just sat there going, no, 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 I'm not a criminal. I don't do anything wrong. And and that like owned me. I couldn't leave my house for 6 months. I was petrified that people would find out. I owned a company. I have a child. It was just like layering and layering and layering. And the more I studied shame, and Brene Brown was like my superhero here. The more I studied it, the more she said things that really related to me, that holding it in was hurting me more. Holding it in and not speaking my shame. So I made a video on being arrested, and
Mm.
it could not hold me anymore. Like, so go ahead. You want to watch it? I'm not embarrassed. I don't own that. He's the one that was the abuser, not me. I just got caught in a spider's web there, and that was sort of the thing. And I had to learn to not hold that shame. And I think that's a very big part of healing shame, is to learn to face it and not live with it inside of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I suspect that, people watching are thinking, okay, that's great, Tracy. That's amazing that you did that, right? And you were able to, take the power away from that shameful experience by letting everybody know um, what happened. But how did you get to that point, right? I mean, I feel like, oh, that takes so much courage for you to say, I'm just going to make this video and put it out there, and the hell with what everybody thinks. Right. That's really hard, right? Even if, again, if we know, hey, that's really going to help me in the end. um, I don't know if anything, comes up for you, if you remember sort of like, what was it that, helped you actually do it?
It was the fear of living with it and sitting alone with it. I just didn't like it. I didn't like it controlling me. I didn't like it keeping me in the house. And I had to learn that this wasn't my default. This wasn't something I had done. If I had gone and robbed a grocery store, fine. I would have done something that earned that shame. But for this particular situation, I just had to dig myself out, understand narcissistic abuse, understand what I missed, understand my family patterns. I had so much work to do, and I was really doing a lot during that 6 months when I didn't leave the house. I was just reading and
Right, right.
I learned that that wasn't part of it. And Brene has a really good quote that I got it saved. Is empathy is the antidote to shame. If we put shame in a petri dish, it needs three things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If we mix shame with empathy, shame cannot survive. And so the secrecy, the silence, and the judgment. I was self-judging myself. So my friends, they knew the truth. the people that were going to judge me, I can't change their mind, but I'm not going to hold on to the shame. And that was the bottom line. How would you tell someone to let go of the shame in my situation or any kind?
Yeah, well, one thing that, that I was thinking about when you were talking is trying to remember that most of the time we are our own worst critics. So generally, the things that you're saying to yourself, right, all of the negative things that you're saying to yourself about that event, are probably worse than what anybody else is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be a helpful thing to remember, is that it's sort of like we're having this sort of catastrophic thinking, like we're imagining that everybody is thinking something even worse, right? It's going to be even worse than what we're thinking. It's probably not. Especially when we're talking about people who know you and care about you, is they're probably going to actually have more empathy for you than you're having for yourself, unfortunately or fortunately, right? Um, but here's, probably, I think maybe you may have skipped some of the story. I don't know for sure, but here's what I suspect you did, and this is what I would tell people is probably like whatever the big shame thing is that you're wanting to rid yourself of. Probably I wouldn't go directly to make a video and put it on YouTube for all the world to see, right? Because probably what you did is first tell this story to people that you knew loved you and supported you and were safe people, right? Because that's where we want to start. If we want to set ourselves up for success in sharing things that we feel ashamed of. So when we accept the notion of part of that process is sharing that information, getting it out of that secret place, is figure out who are the people that you can tell that to. And for some people, if there isn't a friend or a family member or a coworker or somebody that sort of automatically comes to mind where you go, okay, that's a safe person, I could share that with that person. Sometimes it's a therapist, or sometimes it's a 12-step group, or some place like that where there's already some safety and support that's built into the context of the relationship, because that's where I would suggest that you start is and you also might think about, well, maybe if this is really new and this is really hard for me, let me start by sharing something that I feel a small amount of shame about, and I'm going to sort of practice and work myself up to the biggest piece of the shame, right? The thing that I'm feeling the worst about. Because I think what we hope to get when we share the story is both the empathy, but also the feedback, that's basically telling us that you're kind of been thinking about this situation all wrong, right? Right. That's part of the empathy, is like, I understand, I feel for you, I feel with you. But at the same time, like, I understand how you got to think about it like that, but your thinking is off base, because right, you're blaming yourself and criticizing yourself for something that wasn't anything that you did wrong here. It's not, this arrest was not a reflection of you being a terrible person, or an inadequate, unworthy person, right? That's not the story. I mean, I don't think it's the true story, and it's certainly not a helpful story to keep telling ourselves.
Absolutely. And it is what you were saying is different parts. Yes, I did the parts where I trusted and went to my friends, and even saying something when we're extremely shamed, we get that wash of shame telling somebody. I see it in my support groups all the time, just even saying it. But that's the first release. Like, that's where you are letting out in the petri dish. You're going, okay. And it's not easy to face that with your friends. But you tell two friends, and all of a sudden it's not as hard. That first person, it's hard. Even saying you're divorced or getting a divorce can bring a lot of shame to people, because you signed up for the deal with two kids and a dog and a picket fence and for life and death do us part, and it's failed. I'm not a failure, but they put it in there, right? Oh gosh, look, I couldn't make it work. And if you've been with someone who's abuser, they're probably blaming you. So even just saying those things can bring shame. And so when we look at it and we start to tell people slowly, there'll be people in your life that are going to go to the dark side, and you're going to lose some friends and you'll see the true friends are going to understand, be empathetic, and be there for you. It's not that you're always going to lose a friend, but you know, in a divorce, in a situation, they pick sides. It just happens, and so letting go of them and letting go of the shame that comes with that. You know, I've lost my best friend over this, or they told my sisters, or something like that. These are things that we have to work through. We have to face. Um, how how do people activate this shame? Like, how is it like come into a situation? Like I'm describing divorce and relationship. How does that come in to be shame versus I just feel really bad about it?
Well, I mean, you may not realize that it's shame. I think it is often the truth is that you do just feel really bad. You might be angry, you might be depressed, but underneath there is the shame. And sometimes, sometimes we don't recognize that. I think until it's almost like you can get stuck in the other feelings. Um, because of the shame, like I said, like if you sort of think about it as not just a feeling but really a belief about yourself, um, then it drives all of the thinking that you're having about yourself and the things that you're doing. Um, so I think for people that have grown up with shame, right, as a familiar feeling, is you don't always know that it's there. You might actually be tuning into some of the other feelings and not recognizing that there's shame underneath there too. But I think, for people who are prone to shame, as we were saying earlier, it's very easy for it to be triggered. Sometimes it's because somebody says something like, you know, you're a terrible mother, or I can't believe you did that. Or sometimes it's just things that we, say to ourselves, the way we're interpreting the events. And it's not because anybody actually, said something to, sort of prompt the feeling of shame. It's sort of like an automatic thought process. I think that starts to happen for us, is like, that's sort of like the default story about why are these, difficult things, these bad things happening in my life. It's because of me. Like that's the story that we, told ourselves from when we were small, because we didn't have any other way of understanding why these terrible things were happening, the confusing things, the stressful things that might have been happening. Like we don't really have, the cognitive ability to understand, why your parents are abusing you, or why, your parents are ignoring you. Like we can't understand that can have really nothing to do with us, right? We only understand things from our own perspective. And so that the easiest story to hold on to is it must be something that I've done wrong, right? It must be that I'm not a good kid, I'm too needy, I'm too difficult, I'm unlovable. Right. So again, like that's the familiar tape that just keeps playing in the background. And so here we are, right? We're in the adult relationship, and your husband walks out on you, and what's the go-to story, right? It must be, because I'm a bad wife. It must be because I'm not pretty enough. It must be because I'm stupid. It must be because I'm, nagging too much, right? It's something fundamentally wrong with me, rather than, trying to be curious about, like, maybe there, might be some other explanations for this. Right. And this is, sort of the gift of being an adult is, first we have to sort of calm ourselves, because it's hard to, tap into sort of that, more logical part of our brain when we're really activated. But if we can, kind of slow things down, take some deep breaths, maybe, have a little time to ourselves, we can then try to start asking ourselves some of the questions that can help us figure out, that maybe there's a different story. Maybe there's more to the story than just that old one. That maybe that was never the best, most accurate story to begin with. Right? It's easy to go there.
And when
You
it's
know,
familiar, it's familiar. I mean, it's like you don't know there's a difference if that's all you've ever known is to go to that place of shame. And I know that there's with toxic shame where it's really been there a long time and it's holding you. it can have a lot of other side effects, such as you become a people pleaser. Are there other things that you can identify that might, with holding on to the shame for too long, can kind of lead you down?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think almost, there's almost sort of an endless list of things that we might say that can be be the negative outcome of it. But I think like I've already been saying, maybe this idea, sort of this pervasive belief about ourselves, is really what I might say is the toxic element of shame. Versus somebody who really just feels shame about an isolated incident. And again, there are people who don't feel shame about everything sort of all the time in their lives, right? I would say that's really the toxic, piece of it, is that, when it's the answer, or the feeling that we have for like almost everything that's going on, it's just right there all the time. Versus, sort of normal shame, if you will, which is more situational, of I feel like there's something wrong with me, because of this particular thing, but
But not like
um,
all around type things. Yeah.
yes, right. It becomes like I said, a feeling that we have so often, because it's really how we think about ourselves most of the time. um,
You have a meme out there on Pinterest, and boy, I love following your stuff. And I printed out the meme, which is a shame meditation. And I read it to one of my support groups the other day, and people were crying and going, I want to be that. I'm not there yet. And can you tell everyone how they can find that particular thing? Because I would love for them to tap into that and read it, because it will kind of calm you down and help you.
oh, where is that actual meditation?
Can they find it on the website or
Um, I
on?
would honestly, Tracy, I will have to look, to tell you the truth, but I will get it for you and make sure it's available. Maybe we can put the link, with this video so that people can download it. Yeah, this is the problem is, I create too many things, and I don't lose track of where they are anymore. Obviously, they're out there, probably on, Facebook and Pinterest, but we will make it easier for people. But yes, things like that really, I think, can be helpful, because they also really, they try to tap into having compassion for ourselves, which is, the other part that I think is really important in trying to deal with the shame, is like we've talked about, trying to pull it out of the secret, or out of the secret zone into being known. But I think, it's both in order to do that, and in addition to that, like we also want to try to be kinder to ourselves, right? um, like I was saying, like we are just so hard on ourselves and so critical, and we just think such, lousy things about ourselves. Um, Things like we wouldn't do that to anybody else. And, I think that's such a simple way to think about it, is just trying to treat yourself like you would treat somebody else. Um, if somebody else, came to you and said, hey, I feel really ashamed that I got arrested. Um, I mean, you would never say the things that you were saying to yourself, right? I mean, you would have empathy, right? And so that's the other thing. Like, if we can try to practice, recognizing that in some ways we're just like everybody else, and um, our feelings are normal. There's nothing wrong with them, um, and at the same time, we all deserve, compassion. We all deserve empathy from ourselves and from other people. The judgment is not going to get us anywhere, that we want to be, right? I mean, it's not going to help us feel better about ourselves. It's not going to help us do better in life. It's not going to help us make better choices. It's not going to help us, get out of an abusive relationship. We have to be able to, start, giving ourselves, some of the emotional good stuff that we need.
And self-love is something that gets beaten down, and um, we're so busy taking care of others that we don't give it to ourselves. And that's a perfect example. Thank you for sharing it, because we do have to look at ourselves and say, what would you tell your best friend about that? And would you listen to your best friend if she said it to you, right? I'm a catastrophizer. I am like a master catastrophizer. I will like take anything and just go way down the gutter with it. And I had to learn, wait, that's a pattern. That's not real. I had to identify what negative thought patterns were going through my mind that could control, that I didn't really know I had that choice. So it was very, very good to learn all of that and learn to take control, and not let myself go down so low every time. It's like recovery is just like a little dip. You're going to go somewhere.
Right. Like if you can almost try to just stay more in the present with it, right? Because the catastrophizing, like when we go down that rabbit hole, it's really like we're imagining the what if and the what if and the what if and the what if, and it's everything's worse than the next thing, right? And it just builds on itself, imagining one bad thing leading to another bad thing. But if we can just stay like, okay, I don't know that any of that's going to happen. So let me just stay with what is right now. Um, because it's a funny thing. I mean, I think on some level, sometimes we think that we're almost like we're preparing ourselves to deal with these terrible things that might happen. But we're really not. I mean, it's both. Generally, all those negative things are probably not going to happen anyway. But even if they are, you're not actually, better prepared to deal with them because you've been worrying about them. You're probably honestly just more depleted, because that's not actual preparation. That's just, ruminating. That's just thinking in circles about the same thing. It's not actually a solution. So, I mean, you could certainly ask yourself, is there anything that I could actually do about this? Is there something that's in my control that, will help me deal with it? And if there is, great, do it, certainly. But if the answer is no, then really that's like, okay, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. So let me just stay with, you know, what's going on right now, how I'm feeling right now, what I can do right now, what's in my control. Um, because that ultimately is more empowering, right, when we stay here in this moment rather than, either worrying about the future or, also dwelling about the past either, right? The things that have been done and that we can't undo either.
Yeah, and fear is part of this, fear of the future, or catastrophizing, or putting it over there versus right here I'm safe. Right now, that's not happening. I'm just imagining it happen, maybe trying to prepare that it might happen, but it doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. And so what we're doing ourselves, we're losing today because we are worrying about what happened there. And so to hold on to things and know what to hold on to and what to let go is going to be the key. And I really appreciate you talking to us about shame today, because I know so many survivors struggle with it, and the misunderstanding, I feel guilty, I feel shame, I don't know what to do. And again, that's the bottom layer, right? There's other things on top of it. So for all of you out there in YouTube and podcast land, we've been talking with Sharon Martin, and she has been enlightening us on shame and how to cope with it. So thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned a little bit more about shame and guilt than you did when you started this day off today. Try to do your best to study this, read some great blogs. Just Google Sharon's name. You are going to find a lot of her stuff. Her website is right underneath the picture. You're going to be able to find that meditation by finding a link in our notes about this video. So let go of shame. If you have to learn more about narcissistic abuse, visit my website, narcissistabusesupport.com. I've got free ebooks on there, I've got courses, and I've got blog stories and all kinds of things that are going to help you understand narcissistic abuse as well as how to heal from it. So this is Tracy Malone. Thank you for visiting today, and I will see you real soon.